Hello there Reason people, PoohBear here and welcome to my channel. And this is a bit more of a show and tell rather than a full breakdown of this particular combinator patch. It was something obviously I was playing around with, using compulsion in the sequencer mode. I've got lots of compulsions going on which are actually in the impaginator mode. I've decided to make use of chord line again. I know that appeared in one of my last videos. As I say, chord line has been something that's been sitting in my toolbox for absolutely ages and I hadn't really touched it before, so I'm starting to make use of that now. We actually are using denote as actually a denote. MIDI CV converters, I'm using obviously some deltas as well, kicking around, a bit of auto latch. That sort of helps me out with the drum side of things. But it's actually, it looks like quite a complex patch which is going on, but it's actually very straightforward. And as I say, I will break down and talk a bit more about especially this compulsion, because I hit on a couple of technical issues and I'll let you know of some of the issues I found and some of the ways I worked around some of the things I was looking at. And that's what this video is mainly going to be a bit about, really, is some of the issues I hit on and how I got around those particular issues as well. The actual instruments being used, let's be honest, it doesn't really matter the fact I'm using a Vital here. This happens to be doing some of the arpeggiator stuff. So as I say, we've got this this compulsion which is driving the chord line. From the chord line, I am sending some of that data off to the compulsion, which I'm obviously nicking some of the data and creating this into an arpeggiator, and that's been driven by a Vital. There's quite a bit of movement going on inside that Vital. Then down here, this is our bass line, which is obviously just a monotone. Comes out quite nice. What I've actually got is I've only got 4 bass patterns, but I'm splitting them, as you can see. Every now and then they'll be updating, so it might play the whole pattern as a whole, it might play half the pattern and then split another half. But because I've got 4, it gives me like 16 variations of that's going to choose on. I've only got 8 variations on the different arpeggiators for the RP sound in the background. And then obviously I've got a melody going on, which is working very similar to the bass. Big difference being, well, it's not a big difference, I happen to be using 5 patches, which will give me 25 variations. And of course these are all being randomized, same with the basses being randomized, and that's being randomized, which one are we going to be using, which is all being controlled by this compulsion. And I'll show how that's actually working, because you might look at this and say, well, there's not really a great deal what you can see going on here. I've just got a few notes here and there, but yet you can hear all this wonderful music going on in the background. And a little bit further down, so oh yeah, I'm using the Cobra and the Craft, that's for the melody type thing. Again, as I say, it doesn't really matter what instruments you are using here. And yes, I'm shaping them a little bit. I have an LFO which I is mainly using for modulation, but because I had the little LFO here, I end up whacking in a bit of a noise effect in the background, which comes in every now and then. And then I'm using obviously this delta here, which is deciding to choose which kind of drum pattern I'm going to play, and I play that for 8 whole bars before I decide to choose something different. So straightforward. Arpeggiator, bass. In fact, here we go in the mixer, we can see it here. So if we can zoom in a bit, there we go, we've got arpeggiator, bass leads, a few little drum things, and here's that noise coming in the background. Very, very straightforward stuff. Let's actually whiz all the way to the top. The other thing is, yes, I do run the sequencer here at the bottom, but as you can see, I've got absolutely nothing at all actually in the sequencer. It's all being driven, as I say, by that compulsion at the top. I have this running, as I've said in the past, purely because of timing, and I found most stuff actually in this patch work without having to run this, but I do find the UJam drum maker, beat maker, whatever it's called, I do find that kind of goes a little bit out of sync. So as soon as you have something like the transport bar running, it really does keep it all in sync. So if we actually have just a close look, I want to get these two on the screen because there's quite a big relationship between these two. So what I've actually got is I've got myself 5 chord sets. So the top of the row of the chord line, these are your chord sets. So you come up with your different chord sets, and in each chord set I'm actually only using 4 chords. Obviously I can use up to 7 in each set. I just happen to be playing around. Yeah, I know I've got some more chords there, but I decided to stick with 4, 4s, 4s and 4s. So that's what I decided to go with. And so the actual chord is being selected by this particular note, which is obviously being driven. So this is quite straightforward. So it's now obviously, that's the highlighted one. So there we go, we're now on that second note. And then it's going to come across C major, and then it's going to go into a G minor. There it goes. And you can see them happening at the top, but because there's so many running at different speeds, you get all these lights, so it becomes a little bit harder to sort of follow what's going on. I then have this funny looking, because it looks like it's all playing the same note. Well, I had to do that because what I wanted to do, I decided originally, and you can see these notes are actually grayed out here, and even on this row they're grayed out. Well, they're actually controlling the chord sets, but obviously you can see it's fixed, and I wanted to have the chord sets randomized, so I choose a random one, but I will play each of the chords in sequence. So the only way I could, it'd be great if we could somehow link the different lanes together, and then have a randomized mode so they'll all jump around together, but it doesn't quite work. So what I decided to do is, as you can see, there's 5 I've got, and there's obviously 5 chord sets which I've got to select from. And then what I've done is created some CV, so let's select on lane 11, and each of these CV values is the equivalent of so that would be like a C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, and an A sharp. So that's the equivalent CV data I'm sending out. Am I doing anything else funny with this at the back? Let's have a quick look. So this would be this CV data here coming out. As you can see, I've got the gate dropping straight out of it. So I'm using the gate from them notes, but the actual CV happens to be going up here. The only reason it's going up here is just going through this CV analyzer, because I was just trying to work things out, and then it's coming down the stack. But don't worry, you don't need anything like that for that to work. It was just for me working some stuff out. And so obviously that can come in here, but obviously the big difference on the front is now I've got my denotes, so I'm actually removing them notes so they won't come through from the compulsion, and I'm replacing them. Now that might sound a bit confusing of what I'm actually saying there, but because obviously this one here is actually playing like an A sharp. So I don't want the A sharp note to come down, because that's what I'm telling it to play, because I've replaced it with the CV data, which could be the C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp. So they're all denoted out, and they're coming down and being fed into this particular player stack thing, which comes down to here. There's also another little funny, which is everything is working slightly behind. So that is one of the first issues obviously I hit with compulsion, because obviously the way compulsion works is because you've got your lanes S1 to S16, I think you find if you've got loads of stuff, say like on this first column, it's actually going to output it as the S1, then S2, S3, So if I've got here and here highlighted, it's going to send out S1 first and then S11 straight afterwards. Obviously it's happening really, really quickly, but MIDI is serial. MIDI is not parallel. You send it out serial data, so it sends it down the stack. The issue with that is it means it receives this note, which will then choose a chord. Chord line works in the principle of if I'm playing a chord and I change anything, it doesn't actually change the chord. You have to then reinitiate the chord you're playing. So that will come along and say, I'm going to play A minor, then the top bit will come along and go, actually, I'm going to select this one here, and then the next note will say, oh, actually I'm going to play the A minor from this set, not from the previous set. So it's to do with the way the sets change and the way they work. So I've decided to put on this particular lane here, so S11's highlighted, I put a big delay on them. So these gates aren't going to happen until the very, very end of them hitting their notes, which means they far off, which means that I can choose my chord set in time for when this note, so this note's now being sent out just prior to that note. I did try and add a small delay onto that particular gate, that one note at the very beginning, but it threw everything out. It threw all the drums out, the bass out, everything was just thrown right out. It just didn't sound right. So this was my best solution. And obviously the reason I've gone for the notes here is obviously I can have a randomization on it. So they're now, these steps here are randomly choosing which one are we playing next. As I say, then that'll take the CV data, convert it into the note, choose the appropriate chord set, and off we go. Very kind of confusing stuff, and obviously because everything's working at loads of different speeds, you can see S11's been slowed right down, so how often we change it. And in fact, at the moment I've got it changing every 20 bars, I'm gonna say. So it's basically, it's looping around, I think of it looping around each of these 2.5 times. And I went for the half, so it means it's gonna play them first two, but when it changes to a new chord set, because it's halfway through, it would play the last two of the next chord set. So if it was here, there you go, this chord set's just been chosen. So it's now playing that one, and now it's gonna loop round and play all of these twice. So then the next chord is gonna start from the beginning, but then on the second time round it's gonna finish on that note, and then another chord set will be chosen, and then it'll start playing from there. So it's a little bit confusing for doing it that way, but the reason I did it that way, it's now mixing the number of chord variations I've got together even more so. So rather than just having 5, I've now got, well, I've still been playing my basic 5 all the time, and every now and then I've now got a combination of them 5 in together. So you know, again, you're looking at like 25 different kinds of combinations you could go for. So that's the only reason I did that, was to give that little bit of variation, and obviously I had to slow that one right down. We've got other things at the top here going really fast, and I've actually made myself notes because you can get yourself really confused very quickly with this stuff. And I'm actually using, again, the CV out for doing pattern changes. So the first 3 are actually changing all the patterns, and when I say pattern changes, we're talking about really these pattern changes here. So what I've got going on is out the back, is we go from the back of here. Sorry, I'm hitting my I thought I was tapping around to the back. Yes, there we go. So these are the outputs. I take them actually to the programmer. So we get an input into obviously the combinator, and the combinator itself is then obviously programmed to actually change the patterns, and that's obviously providing the data for them. That's what the first 3 rows are doing for this particular compulsion. This little row here, we've got ourselves a little bit more CV data. Where are we? 13, just 2 steps. And what that's doing is on the bass line, you can see for the first bar, it's actually plays it an octave down, or sorry, an octave up, and then the last bar on the second oscillator only, it drops it an octave. So it's not like it's a big shift, because it's only the second oscillator, which is obviously not so mixed in, but you can actually hear it. So this always gives a nice high bit of a bass sound, a little bit more plucky-ish, and that's just suddenly like a bit more deeper. So I feel like this is happy, and then that's sort of a bit more serious. And I think that actually works really well. I like the way that sort of turned out. Where were we? So So yeah, so I've got octave change. I'm actually using a gate out again. So I've got this, that row there should be on a random. Is it on a random and on a, oh, it's not on a random. It's walking through, oh, it's on the probability. So yeah, so I've got that one on a probability. So it gets confusing when you think I've got like you can have random and you can have probability. Obviously the advantage of random is I'm going to randomly choose something to happen, and the probability is it going to happen? But when you've got steps, you could, and you've got walking through, when it gets to this step, this is where it's always going to be either play or not play. Whereas random, it could easily pick it up at any other sort of time. So I always wanted the noise to appear just as it is coming to an end of like a pattern ready to change into a next chord set. That's why that's actually placed there. And that worked out quite nice as well. I thought that actually worked really nice. And that is really it for this particular compulsion. As I say, it looks very compact of what we really are doing. But as I say, it's mainly these are the CV stuff we've got coming out for the first top lot of stuff, and the notes. I thought that was quite a nice little workaround, because obviously I wanted to randomly choose which one I wanted to pick. As I say, the denote then denotes out the higher bits of this sequencer and just leaves me with the important bits coming through, which is actually the 4 bits to choose which chord we're playing within our chord set. We're then coming out, this is actually showing you the chord we really are currently playing for this, and then that obviously goes through into a CV MIDI converter. Then that gets passed on to the lead and the bass. One thing I didn't say was, I think it's this one here. Let's have a quick look again. Yeah, so this MIDI out here, which is coming through, that's actually going all the way down to the delta to play and start the drums off. So one thing to bear in mind with the MIDI CV converter, just in case you didn't know, is when data comes into the input and we've got data coming down the stack, the data will come down the stack and then get merged, or more to the point, it'll come down the stack and send its data out of the MIDI outputs. Then it merges itself with the MIDI inputs, and then it carries on down the stack. So if I wanted to take this data, which I'm inputting into this CV MIDI converter, and say I wanted to route it also to somewhere else, I'll have to add another MIDI CV converter here below it. So the data's come down into this stack, it's now going to merge the MIDI in, and then it's going to pass it down the stack. So it's effectively taking this data and this data, merged it, passing it down, then it will actually send it out. But at this stage, anything which is coming in any of these inputs will never go out on these outputs. There are, you can think of it as I say, that's the line. So it comes in, sends it out, merges and down. Which is quite handy, it works quite well. So you may see even in some of my other projects, I have double stacks of MIDI CV converters, and just in case people might be thinking, oh, why I've always done that? Well, it's because I might be taking an input and then merging it out. The other reason you might see a double stack MIDI converter is I'm actually sending stuff out in the poly, and I'm actually having to make sure it's actually set to the mono in some other cases. So that's going through that. So where were we? So yes, we're on to this particular one. So this is really, as I say, going out to the bass and also going out to the melody. So first of all, nothing special. We just got loads of different simple patterns here for the arpeggiator. The only thing I've got going on in here is I have this clock divider, which I'm saying every 5th note basically I'm playing, I'm also going to transpose that note down an octave and play them at the same time. So that's quite a confusing one. In fact, that's just reminded me of something, seeing that particular pattern. Originally, I had one compulsion which was doing the melody, the arpeggiator, and doing the bass in one, and that worked quite well. And then I was using the denotes, so I still used the MIDI converter to swap the data around, then I was using the denotes to denote the appropriate line out. So when I sort of say come down to the ARP, I'd have a denote which would say let's hide all the melody lines, let's hide all the bass lines. Now that works brilliantly when you're working in a very tight set range of notes. But because I decided, no, I'm going to have this chord or I'm going to have this chord, and the notes started getting wider and wider, you start going outside of your constraints, so it doesn't work anymore. There's too much overlapping and you start losing too many notes. So I then decided to split each compulsion down. But this happened to be the start, or I've obviously removed the bass notes here, but that was one of the melodies I was coming up with, and obviously this was the arpeggiator stuff in the middle bit here. But I've allowed this to go fully through onto this particular arpeggiator. So yeah, so every fifth note I actually take it down an octave and just play it. It just gives it that little bit of different, slightly different feel actually into that. There we go, let's pull this up. I had my screen all set up in 4K, but I've actually dropped it down to a 1040, and I keep moving my screen so I keep seeing my desk. So yeah, we've just got a bit of movement going on with these LFOs. You can see, you know, there's quite a slow LFO, 73 seconds to actually go through a full cycle there. If we click on that one there, that should be the cutoff. So yeah, I'm playing with this cutoff again, making it go cut right down. So it takes this sound out, but because, yeah, well, it gives it a real nice bit of movement with everything else going on. So the bass, yeah, I'm taking the notes and obviously transposing them down an octave because we're playing the bass. But again, I've got this on obviously arpeggiator with a spread mode, and so you might see all these notes quite close together where actually they're playing the same note, but they're obviously being shifted around with an octave. So we've got an octave up and an octave down. So, or a straight octave, and that's how I do it. And you really can see it here, sort of playing, just doing an octave, and then I am then grabbing a few other extra notes to give the runs. So that's a quite straightforward setup, but again, I think you get a real good result out of that particular setup. Melody, and the melody is exactly the same as what I've just been saying about, the same as the bass really as well. I do, again, the way I try and split my compulsions is I have this more as a regular octave. I can see this one's jumping around, but unfortunately. So usually when I go down to my S1, 2 and 3, I have these down an octave. Then when I get to 5, 6 and 7, they're obviously in the middle. And then when I go to my 9, I go up an octave. And then when I go higher, I've got to go up even, the last octave. And that's how I kind of set my compulsions up. Because don't forget, I've got 4 notes, so that's why I can have 4 groupings, as a way to think of it, shifting the octaves up and down. But obviously this is the melody, so it's mainly floating around the top. Yeah, I'm just using a Cobra. Yes, I'm modulating the filter, so I am making this particular Cobra sound quite thin, but it's been underpinned by a Craft. This isn't being used anymore. Oh, no, sorry. I'm getting myself confused about something else. I put this MIDI CV converter in here and took this output, and I was feeding that into this color and EQ, because originally I had it following the notes. So obviously I had this turned on and I had my high pass following that particular note, because I had actually had a different instrument in there altogether. But it was because it's hitting quite high pitched notes. There's a lot of anti-aliasing going on and some other artifacts creeping in, and I find this is a good little one to turn that on when I do the tracking, and it really does sort of keep it down and gets rid of any kind of funnies going on. That works quite well, but then I changed my instrument, so I didn't really have to worry about that tracking it anymore, but obviously it's still left in there. The wide rings are all over the place, and I'm using this sine wave to change things around. But that sine wave, because the great thing about little LFO, you've got your shapes, and then you can do a pulse width on any shape. You're not just your box standard square. So this is a sine wave, as you can see. You might be saying it doesn't look like anything like a sine wave. Well, it's not, because obviously I've shifted the pulse width. So it's a very quick up the high end, and then it takes a lot lower at the low end. And so I do take the signal, invert it, and do other kinds of things with it. And as I said, I took some white noise as well, shoved that noise through a phaser to give me a nice little effect here and there. But that's affecting a few different controls all over the place. I say it's doing a filter, and it's doing a few of the wideners. This is a very straightforward sort of stack we've got going on with the Delta. I'm actually looking for one particular note, which is the C3, which would be really, I'm looking for this very first note to be played. So as soon as I pick up that first note being played, I then can pass it onto my chant switch, which the chant switches you can only have a count of 4. So this has got the maximum number of outputs on it. Because I needed more, you just quite simply, I put a chant switch before it, and I've actually weighted it because I want this bottom one selected more than the top one as well. But this is another way you can get around having more than 4, and it's still all kind of randomized up. And then obviously these are set to different notes, which it's then playing out, held for 8 bars, playing the old candy. I don't know when that's going to open up. Oh, hey, it's opened up on the screen, that's a miracle. So yeah, so that's just playing a box, bit of candy there. Playing around with the snare, got a bit of a gated reverb playing around on that bit of snare. A little bit of saturation, as you tend to do for things. And that is really it. There's not really much more to say. I don't think I've got any other kind of funnies apart from here at the very top. So yeah, let's talk about that. So one of the things I was going to try and do with compulsion as well originally was I wanted to use the CV to do some gating on, I can't remember what I was using it. I swapped around and actually used the gate in the end from the actual pucker gate. But what I found was with the auxiliary or the CV, you cannot get this down to 0 volts. It doesn't drop all the way down to 0 volts. It drops down to 0.0079 volts. And that's an issue if I then wanted to use like this kind of setup. So if I said, oh, I'm going to have that full and I'm going to take this all the way down, that's the lowest it'll go, and that's not 0. So you can't then use that as gated information because the gates never drop to 0. So when it comes back to the next step, it's going to say, well, I'm still at 0, I'm not going to work. So what you can simply do, and this is really what this was up here, this is just a simple test. In fact, is this wired up to anything at the moment? Let's have a look. It is wired up. Oh, there we go. I was playing around with, so I've been playing around with this data here. Where am I going? To the front, I think. So yeah, so I've got the data coming in. I've got this just ever so slightly offset. So it's, as you can see now, it's dropping to its -1. So that's the signal which is coming out. Or, yeah, so you can see it's just slightly high. But this is the final result after I put it through the RVL. So what I do is I put it through the RVL, I can put this negative and I can put a 001 on this and move this up to, that'd be 0.8 or whatever, or 008. And so that offsets that enough and brings that below. It doesn't matter if this is a minus number, so the gate information, it doesn't matter if it goes into a negative number, because from a negative number we're then going positive, so a gate will work again. Yes, you might say, oh, it never gets to a very full volt. Well, in my particular case, it didn't matter. So if I really wanted the full range, I would use Janitor and just scale it up ever so slightly and then offset it. But I found Janitor was saying I used a lot for offsetting. I'm now using the RVL a lot more for doing all my offsets, mainly because you can be so specific in how you want to offset it. And again, in another video, I think I showed where I was actually using these particular values with the Janitor, because you can then take the offset on the Janitor or even the scaling and set them to 0, and then from the CV you can set them exactly to the scaling you want, because obviously the scale knobs, it jumps around on the Janitor. It's very hard to get in between, say, certain values. But with use of this, you get some very specific values indeed. So that's what I was using that. So that was a little funny I found with this particular compulsion. You couldn't get a pucker 0 volt. It was always just slightly above, but that's my simple workaround. Put it through the RVL. I can say I've just taken literally that, because this is the volts. Yeah, that's the volts which coming in. Let me just double check to see what the volts. Yeah, so that's coming out. So that's the volt which is absolutely coming into from the compulsion into here. Then I'm going through the RVL, and then that's putting it in the result over here. So we can see that there is obviously a slight, so at the full volt it's just slightly over. So I think that maybe there might be just a weird calculation going on in compulsion of why that's actually happening. So I would have said that should have said really 1 volt and not 1.0079, but there we go. As I say, this isn't really doing anything. I think this is more to do with tracking. Oh, is it tracking my gate data now? Yeah, I was trying to be tracking gate data. That was something else what I had going on. Oh, that's probably how I was originally discovered I had this issue, because I was thinking, why isn't my gate triggering? Why isn't my gate triggering? It should be. I should be hitting 0 volts. So I was obviously using the analyzer at one time for doing it, and then brought the other ones in. This is my look ahead. So this is actually the data which is coming from here, which is being passed up. So I can see that would be the next one which is going to be played is actually should be this set here. So when it flips over and the gate fires, it's going to be this set here. You've got to remember the gate is on a real long delay. So even if you've got a delay set, the delay is for the note and gate data, it's not for the CV data. So as soon as something switches into this step, it's going to go. It doesn't matter if you've got a real long kind of delay, like these are real long delays, it ignores them. It's just saying, no, I'm on this step here, that's the data I'm going to fire up. And as you can see, that's the equivalent of that was that A sharp. So now I know after it's completed this whole set 2.5 times, as I said, it's now going to play that one there. So there we go, we've got a D sharp, so I know that's going to play that one there next. But you can see this is the delay kicking in. It's quite a nice long delay we got going on. And I think that truly is the little funnies and everything else I came across. So I'm just wrapping my brain really hard here. Yeah, there's nothing really else to say about that. You know, compulsion is a very powerful device, and it's worth looking into if you've not used compulsion before. I have done a beginner's guide on compulsion, and I also done a creative thing which I was just using compulsion to do. It's very similar things which I've actually done within here. I suppose, you know, this got built again because of chord lines. I said I hadn't used chord line, it's sitting in my toolbox, and I thought I should try and see if I can do some other stuff with it. And yeah, so this is really how this sort of project grew. Shut up, I'm waffling. I just let you have a little bit more, listen to the results of this. Any questions, far away, and yeah, enjoy.